It was a request designed not as an invitation, but as a weapon, a check for $50,000 to silence a history he wanted to erase. The task? For Celine Monroe, a struggling singer, to perform at the wedding of the man who had promised her forever, the billionaire CEO, Alistair Blackwood. But Alistair didn't know the truth. He didn't know that as Celine stood on that stage, she wasn't just carrying the weight of their broken past, she was carrying his child. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about what happens when a woman, pushed to the absolute edge, decides to stop singing his song and finally write her own. The rain that slicked the streets of downtown Los Angeles was a cold, indifferent gray, the exact color of Celine Monroe's current reality. It seeped into the cracks of the old city, mirroring the chill that had settled deep in her bones, a chill that had little to do with the weather. Her small, second-floor apartment, usually a cozy sanctuary filled with the scent of chamomile tea and old books, felt more like a cage today. The eviction notice on the counter, with its stark red lettering, was the latest bar on that cage. Celine traced the swell of her belly, still barely a whisper beneath her worn-out sweater. 4 months. 4 months of a secret that was both her greatest joy and her most terrifying burden. 4 months since Alistair Blackwood had last spoken to her, his final words delivered not with the warmth she once knew, but with the sterile finality of a business transaction. "It's for the best, Celine. We want different things." He hadn't been wrong. He wanted a dynasty. She had wanted a family. She just never imagined he'd build his dynasty on the ashes of the family they were supposed to build together. Her phone buzzed, a harsh, unwelcome sound, an unknown number with a Beverly Hills area code. She ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. With a sigh, she answered, expecting a debt collector. "Is this Ms. Celine Monroe?" The voice was male, clipped, and reeked of expensive tailoring. It was a voice that didn't know the price of milk because it had never had to buy it. "This is she," Celine said, her own voice sounding small and tired. "My name is Donovan Price. I am the executive assistant to Mr. Alistair Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries." Celine's breath hitched. Her heart began a frantic, painful drumming against her ribs. Alistair. The name was a phantom limb, an ache where something vital used to be. "What is this about?" she managed, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "Mr. Blackwood and his fiancée, Ms. Serafina Sterling, are to be married in 2 weeks' time at the Blackwood family estate in Montecito," Donovan said, his tone as flat as a corporate prospectus. "They are personally requesting your services as a featured musical performer for the wedding ceremony." The world tilted. For a moment, Selena was sure she had misheard. It had to be a prank, a sick, twisted joke. Sing at his wedding? The thought was so grotesquely cruel, it was almost laughable. It was like asking a ghost to toast the happiness of its murderer. "You're joking," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I assure you, Ms. Monroe, I do not joke," Donovan replied, a hint of impatience in his voice. "Mr. Blackwood felt it would be a poignant nod to your shared history, a symbol of goodwill and mutual respect as you both move on to new chapters." Poignant? Goodwill? The corporate jargon was a shield, deflecting the raw, human cruelty of the act. He wasn't just moving on. He was bulldozing their past and asking her to provide the soundtrack for the demolition. He wanted to parade her, his discarded project, in front of his new pristine acquisition. Serafina Sterling, the hotel heiress whose face was plastered across every society magazine. He was turning their story into a sanitized anecdote for his new life. "No," Celine said, the word a raw tear in the fabric of the conversation. "Absolutely not. The answer is no. Perhaps you should hear the terms of the offer before making a final decision," Donovan said smoothly, ignoring her refusal. "Mr. Blackwood is aware of your current circumstances. The compensation for a single 20-minute performance is $50,000. $50,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering and obscene. It was more money than she had seen in her entire life. It was first and last month's rent on a new apartment, far from this one. It was baby furniture, diapers, a savings account. It was security. It was a future. It was a lifeline thrown by the very man who had pushed her overboard. The eviction notice on her counter seemed to scream at her. Her mind reeled, a battlefield of pride versus pragmatism. Her soul screamed in protest. He can't buy your dignity, Celine. He can't pay you to dance on your own grave. But the pragmatic part of her, the part that was now responsible for another life, whispered back, "What dignity is there in being homeless? How will you feed your child on pride?" "He wants to own my silence," she murmured, more to herself than to Donovan. "He wants to pay me to stand there and smile and pretend this doesn't feel like my heart is being carved out with a rusty spoon." The offer includes a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Naturally, Donovan continued, as if she hadn't spoken. Payment would be made via wire transfer, 50% upon signing, 50% upon completion of the performance. It was a trap, a beautiful, gilded trap. If she refused, she was broke, desperate, and facing eviction. If she accepted, she would have to stand before him and his perfect bride, a monument to what he'd thrown away, and sing a song of love. The sheer theatrical audacity of his cruelty was breathtaking. He wasn't just breaking her heart, he was commissioning a symphony for the occasion. "I need to think about it," she said, her voice trembling. "You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow," Donovan stated. "A messenger will be dispatched with the contract for your review. We await your decision." The line went dead. Celine slid down the kitchen cabinet until she was sitting on the cold linoleum floor, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach, around her baby. Tears streamed down her face, hot tears of fury, of humiliation, of gut-wrenching despair. He knew. Somehow he must have known she was struggling. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a power play of the highest order. It was Alistair, in his gleaming tower of steel and glass, reminding her that he was the master of his universe, and she was just a forgotten constellation. She thought back to their beginning, a rainy afternoon just like this one, in a small coffee shop where she used to sing. He'd come in, shaking off the rain from his $1,000 coat, his eyes finding hers across the room. He told her voice was the only real thing he'd heard all day. For 2 years, he had been her world. He'd championed her music, promised her a record deal, a future. He'd held her and whispered that their love was the one thing his money couldn't buy and his power couldn't command. It was all lies. When the pressure from his board of directors and his formidable father mounted for him to secure the Sterling Hotel merger through marriage, he hadn't fought. He had folded. He'd cut her out of his life as cleanly and efficiently as trimming a line item from a budget. Now, this final, exquisite twist of the knife. She looked around her tiny apartment, at the water stain on the ceiling, and the stack of bills she couldn't pay. She thought of the life growing inside her, a life that deserved more than this struggle, a life that deserved a mother who could provide. A cold resolve began to crystallize in her heart, displacing the hot tears of pain. He thought this was his stage, his production. He thought he could buy her compliance and use her as a prop in his perfect wedding. He was paying $50,000 for a performance. Fine, he would get one, but it wouldn't be the performance he was expecting. She picked up her phone and dialed her best friend Maya. "You will not believe the phone call I just got," Celine said, her voice no longer trembling, but low and steady, like the calm before a storm. She was going to sing at his wedding, but the song wouldn't be about his new love. It would be about his greatest secret. 2 weeks later, Celine found herself in a place where the rain didn't dare to fall. Montecito. Here the sun seemed to have a contractual obligation to shine, casting a golden, almost holy glow upon the manicured lawns and towering cypress trees that lined the private road to the Blackwood estate. The Blacktown car, sent by Donovan, purred up the winding driveway, its silence a stark contrast to the frantic symphony of doubt and determination playing in Celine's mind. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress, one of the few nice things she owned. It was modest and flowed loosely, a strategic choice to hide the gentle curve of her pregnancy. In her lap, her hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. The first $25,000 had appeared in her bank account the morning after she'd signed the NDA, a digital proof of her pact with the devil. It had paid her rent for a year in advance and lifted a mountain of debt from her shoulders. but the relief was tainted with the bitter taste of capitulation. As the car rounded a final, sweeping curve, the estate came into view. It wasn't a house, it was a testament to power. A sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion of pale stone and red tiles, overlooking the Pacific Ocean like a king surveying his domain. This was Alistair's childhood home, a place he had described to her in hushed tones, not with fondness, but as a beautiful prison. A place he had sworn he would never get married in. Another broken promise. Donovan Price was waiting for her at the grand entrance, his posture as rigid as the marble columns flanking the door. "Ms. Monroe, welcome. You're on schedule." He spoke as if she were a delivery, not a guest. "The ceremony is in the West Garden at 4 p.m. You will be performing from the gazebo. I will show you." He led her through the house. The interior was cavernous and cold, filled with opulent furniture that looked like it had never been sat on, and priceless art that felt more like an investment than a passion. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and roses, an aggressive, cloying sweetness that made Celine feel faintly nauseous. It was the smell of manufactured perfection. As she walked, ghosts of Alistair's words echoed in the marble halls. "My father believes a man's worth is measured by the size of his house, not the love within it," he'd told her once, curled up on her lumpy sofa. "I want to build a home with you, Celine, a real one, full of music and laughter, not just assets." The hypocrisy was a physical blow. He had become his father. Donovan led her to a small, private drawing room. "You may wait here. Refreshments are available. Please remain in this room until I escort you to the garden at 3:45. It was a polite imprisonment. Left alone, Celine walked to the large bay window overlooking the grounds. Guests were beginning to arrive, a river of pastel silks and dark suits flowing toward the West Garden. They were the 1%, the titans of industry, the socialites. Alistair's new world, a world where she had no place. Suddenly the door opened. Celine turned, expecting Donovan, but it was a woman who entered. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with the kind of effortless grace that can only be born from generations of wealth. She had hair the color of spun gold, and eyes the color of a summer sky. She was wearing a simple but exquisitely cut white silk dress. It was Serafina Sterling. "Oh, I am so sorry," Serafina said, her voice light and melodic. "They told me this room was empty. I was just trying to escape for a moment. The madness out there." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "You must be the singer. Alistair told me about you." Celine's heart froze. What did he tell you? The truth or his version of it? "Celine Monroe," she said, her voice steady. Serafina smiled, a genuine, warm smile that was completely disarming. "Serafina, it's a pleasure to meet you. Ali has told me so much about your talent. He said your voice was unforgettable." There was no malice in her eyes, no hint of suspicion, only a polite, almost naive sincerity. This was harder than Celine had anticipated. It would have been so much easier if the bride-to-be was a monster. But she seemed nice, a beautiful, privileged, and utterly clueless lamb being led to a gilded slaughter. Did she have any idea this marriage was a corporate merger? Did she truly love the man Celine knew was capable of such calculated cruelty? "He's a very persuasive man," Celine replied, the words carefully chosen. Before Serafina could respond, the door opened again. This time it was Alistair. He strode into the room looking impossibly handsome in his custom-tailored tuxedo. For a split second, his eyes met Celine's, and the world fell away. She saw him, not the CEO, not the groom, but the man who had cried in her arms after a fight with his father. The man who knew her favorite song. The man who had traced the lines of her palm and promised to place the world in it. Then, as quickly as it came, the flicker was gone. A mask of cool, impenetrable control slammed down. His eyes became steel. "Sarah, darling, there you are," he said, his voice a smooth, deep baritone that used to be her favorite sound in the world. He walked to Serafina's side, placing a possessive hand on the small of her back. He barely glanced at Celine. "Donovan said our performer had arrived. Everything satisfactory, Ms. Monroe?" He called her Miss Monroe. The formality was a deliberate wall, built to keep her at a distance. Everything is as contracted, Mr. Blackwood, Celine said, the title feeling like acid on her tongue. Excellent, he said, turning his full attention back to his fiancée. Our guests are waiting. He leaned in and kissed Serafina's temple, a perfectly staged gesture of affection for an audience of one. As he turned to lead Serafina out, he paused, speaking to Celine over his shoulder without making eye contact. The song selection, my mother insisted on a classic, but I've made a last-minute change. I've instructed the string quartet to accompany you on Echoes of Us. You remember that one? I'm sure. Celine felt the air leave her lungs. Echoes of Us. It wasn't just a song, it was their song. The one he'd written the lyrics for on a napkin in that coffee shop on their first anniversary. It was a deeply personal, intimate ballad about finding a soulmate in a crowded world. A song no one else had ever heard. To ask her to sing that song at his wedding to another woman was not just cruel, it was a violation, a desecration of the most sacred memory she had of him. He was taking their most private moment and turning it into public entertainment. She stared at his back, at the impeccable cut of his tuxedo, and she finally understood. This wasn't just about silencing her or showing off his power. This was about erasing the meaning of their past entirely. If he could make their song into his wedding song, then it would no longer belong to her. He would own it. He would own the memory. He would own her. A slow, cold fire started to burn in her chest. The hurt and the humiliation began to forge themselves into something else entirely, something hard and sharp. Yes, she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a newfound clarity in the silent room. I remember it. He nodded, a curt final gesture, and led his bride-to-be out of the room, leaving Celine alone with the ghost of a song and the thunder of her own resolve. He thought he knew the words to that song. He thought he had written the ending. He was wrong. She walked back to the window, no longer looking at the guests, but at her own reflection in the glass. She saw the pain in her eyes, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A fighter, a mother, a woman who had just been handed the perfect weapon. He wanted to hear Echoes of Us. Oh, he would hear it, but she was going to add a new verse. His performance was about to become her premiere. The West Garden was a masterpiece of landscape architecture and obscene wealth. Hundreds of white chairs were arranged in perfect rows on a lawn so green it looked artificial, facing a gazebo dripping with white roses and ivy. The air was warm, scented with salt from the distant ocean and the expensive perfume of the guests. A string quartet played softly, their classical music a delicate, civilized veneer over the raw corporate ambition that had orchestrated this day. Celine stood in the shadows just inside the house, waiting for Donovan's signal. Her heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. She could feel her baby move, a small, gentle flutter, as if sensing her mother's turmoil. Celine placed a hand on her stomach, a silent promise. I'm doing this for us, so we can be free. She watched the ceremony begin. She saw Serafina, a vision in a Vera Wang gown, walk down the aisle on the arm of her father, a formidable man with a face like a clenched fist. She saw Alistair waiting, his expression a carefully constructed mask of adoration. He looked at Serafina not like a man in love, but like a CEO admiring a newly acquired, highly valuable asset. As she waited, she overheard two women in ridiculously large hats whispering behind a potted ficus. Can you believe he pulled it off? One hissed. Old man Sterling is a shark. I heard the deal was nearly dead in the water last spring. Well, Alistair always gets what he wants, the other replied, taking a sip of champagne. Eleanor, his mother, told me herself. She said, this merger solidifies the Blackwood legacy for the next 50 years. So romantic, isn't it? Their cynical laughter confirmed everything Celine suspected. This wasn't a marriage. It was a transaction. Serafina wasn't just a bride. She was the key to a corporate empire. And Celine? She had been the inconvenient emotional expense that needed to be written off the books. The knowledge settled not as a new wound, but as a final, clarifying piece of evidence. It absolved her of any lingering guilt about what she was about to do. Donovan appeared at her elbow, his presence as silent and sudden as a shadow. "It is time, Ms. Monroe." He escorted her to the gazebo. As she stepped into the sunlight, a murmur went through the crowd. A few people recognized her from the city's music scene. Most just saw a woman with a guitar, a hired performer. She avoided looking at the front row, at the families united in commerce. Instead, she focused on the microphone, the sole instrument of her rebellion. The officiant finished his platitudes. "And now for a special musical interlude, selected by the groom himself." This was it. Celine took a deep breath, her fingers finding their familiar places on the frets of her worn acoustic guitar. The string quartet began the intro to Echoes of Us, the melody sweet and haunting. It was the sound of her own heart breaking 2 years ago. She looked up, and for the first time, she let her eyes meet Alistair's. He was watching her with an unreadable expression, a faint, proprietary smirk playing on his lips. It was the look of a king watching a court jester perform a commanded trick. He thought he had won. He thought she was about to sing his victory anthem. She began to sing, her voice clear and pure, carrying across the silent garden. Streetlights paint silver on the wet concrete. A coffee shop, an empty seat. She sang the first verse exactly as he had written it. The words were a ghost on her lips, telling the story of their meeting. She could see a flicker of surprise in Alistair's eyes, perhaps at how beautifully she sang it, how much emotion she poured in. He thought the emotion was for him, for the memory. He was wrong. The emotion was fuel. Serafina was watching her, a soft, sentimental smile on her face. She was listening to what she believed was a beautiful, anonymous love song chosen for her wedding day. The dramatic irony was a shard of glass in Celine's heart. Then they reached the end of the first chorus. The quartet swelled, expecting the second verse, the one about shared dreams and whispered promises in the dark. But Celine didn't sing the second verse. Her fingers changed chords slightly, shifting the key from a sweet major to a sorrowful minor. The string quartet faltered for a second, confused. Celine's voice, now imbued with a new, raw power, cut through the perfect afternoon. "You built a world on promises you knew you'd never keep. Said my heart was a treasure, but you sold it cheap." Alistair's smirk vanished. His eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in a flash of cold fury. He made a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture to Donovan, a sharp flick of his fingers. Cut her off, but it was too late. Celine had the attention of every single person in the garden. She was no longer just background music. Donovan started to move toward the gazebo, but Eleanor Blackwood, Alistair's mother, put a hand on his arm, her expression a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. Celine's eyes were locked on Alistair's. She was singing only to him now. "You trade your whispered secrets for a boardroom deal. And you ask me to sing of a love that wasn't real. Did you tell your new bride about the stars we used to own? Or that the empire you're building is on a borrowed throne?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. People were sitting up straighter, whispering to each other. This was no longer a wedding performance. It was a public indictment. Serafina's smile had faded, replaced by a look of utter confusion. She glanced at Alistair, whose face had become a thunderous mask of rage. He looked trapped, exposed under the benevolent Montecito sun. Celine's voice soared, filled with the pain of the last 4 months, with the strength of the life inside her. This was for every lie, every broken promise, every lonely night. The song was no longer Echoes of Us. It was hers now. The music from her guitar and the confused strings behind her built to a crescendo. She had one verse left, the most important one. She took a breath, held the silence for a heart-stopping second, and then delivered the final, devastating blow. Her voice dropped, becoming intimate, clear, and utterly damning. "So here's the final echo that you left behind. A truth you can't abandon or leave to cross your mind. You talk of new beginnings, of a chapter and a page. But you can't erase the co-star who won't be leaving this stage." And then, the last lines. She slowed down, making sure every single word landed with the force of a physical impact. She took one hand off her guitar and rested it, deliberately and unmistakably, on the slight, gentle curve of her stomach. Because the greatest secret that you try to hide is the echo of your heartbeat that's growing here inside. Silence. A profound, absolute silence fell over the garden. The only sound was the distant cry of a seagull and the soft hum of the microphone. Every eye was on her hand, on her belly. They followed her gaze as it remained locked on the groom. Serafina's face had gone chalk white, her eyes wide with dawning, horrified understanding. She looked from Celine's stomach to Alistair's face, and the perfect, fragile illusion of her wedding day shattered into a million pieces. Alistair stood frozen, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock and fury. The mask was gone. The king was naked in his court. Celine finished with a final, soft strum of her guitar. Her performance was over. The truth was out. And in the deafening silence of a ruined wedding, she had never felt more powerful. The silence in the garden was a living entity, a thick, suffocating blanket that smothered the sounds of the ocean and the rustling leaves. It lasted for what felt like an eternity, a frozen tableau of 100 horrified faces, before it shattered into chaos. The first sound was a strangled gasp from Serafina. Her bouquet of white peonies slipped from her fingers, tumbling to the perfect lawn in a cascade of broken blossoms. Her face, moments before alight with bridal bliss, was now a mask of betrayal and disbelief. Her gaze darted between Celine's hand on her stomach and Alistair's ashen face, the terrible equation clicking into place in her mind. Alistair, for his part, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His carefully curated composure had been incinerated, leaving behind only the raw, ugly scorch of exposure. He took a half step forward, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. His eyes, fixed on Celine, were burning with a venomous rage that was terrifying in its intensity. The guests erupted into a cacophony of frantic whispers. Phones, previously tucked away, were being surreptitiously raised. The Sterling family, led by Serafina's formidable father, was on its feet, his face a thundercloud of patrician fury. He strode toward the altar, not to congratulate the happy couple, but to retrieve his daughter. "Serafina," he barked, his voice accustomed to command. "We are leaving." In that moment, Celine felt a surge of adrenaline. Her part was done. She turned, unplugged her guitar, and walked calmly off the back of the gazebo, melting into the pandemonium she had created. She didn't run. Her steps were measured, deliberate. She had walked in as a victim. She was walking out as a catalyst. She had made it halfway back to the house when a hand clamped down on her arm, fingers digging into her skin like talons. She was spun around to face Alistair. His face was inches from hers, contorted with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate. "What did you do?" he hissed, his voice a low, dangerous snarl. "What in God's name did you think you were doing? You just destroyed everything." Celine met his gaze without flinching. The fear she had lived with for months was gone, burned away by the fire of her performance. "I destroyed a lie, Alistair," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "The thing you were destroying was my life, and our child's life." "There is no our child," he shot back, his eyes wild. "There is a problem you created, a mess you have just made infinitely worse. I paid you. I paid you to be a ghost, not a goddamn grenade." "You paid me to sing," she retorted, yanking her arm from his grasp. "You just assumed I'd sing your song. With your lyrics. You were wrong. That money wasn't for my silence, Alistair. It was for my stage. You bought me a microphone and an audience. Thank you for that." His face went from rage to a stunned, pale disbelief. The idea that his own weapon could be turned against him so effectively seemed to short-circuit his brain. He was a master manipulator who had just been devastatingly outmaneuvered. "You will regret this," he seethed, pointing a trembling finger at her. "I will ruin you. You think you're struggling now? I will bury you so deep no one will ever hear your name, let alone your voice, again." "You don't have that power anymore, Alistair. You just gave it all to me." Leaving him standing there, speechless and sputtering amidst the ruins of his perfect day, Celine continued toward the house. She needed to get to the waiting car and disappear before the full weight of the Sterling and Blackwood clans came crashing down on her. She rushed through a side door and found herself in the same drawing room where she had waited earlier. And there, standing by the window, was Serafina. She had torn off her veil, and her face was stained with tears. But when she looked at Celine, her eyes held not the anger Celine had expected, but a fractured, desperate curiosity. "Is it true?" Serafina asked, her voice barely a whisper. Celine simply nodded. There was nothing else to say. Serafina let out a shuddering breath, wrapping her arms around her own waist. "He told me you were unstable," she said, the words tasting like poison. "He said you were a brief fling from his past and that you couldn't let go, that you were obsessed. He said he was worried you might try to cause a scene." The calculated cruelty of his lies, layered one on top of the other, was staggering. He hadn't just discarded Celine, he had tried to erase her very sanity in the eyes of his new fiancée. "He told me this wedding," Serafina continued, her voice breaking, "was the beginning of our real story, a story built on trust and honesty." She let out a bitter, heartbreaking laugh. "It was all a lie, all of it. The way he looked at me, the things he said, it was all a performance." In that moment, Selene didn't see an heiress. She saw another woman who had been deceived by Alistair Blackwood's charm. They were on opposite sides of the same counterfeit coin. "I'm sorry," Selene said, and she meant it. "I never wanted to hurt you." Serafina looked at her, a flicker of something steely and resilient entering her tear-filled eyes. "You didn't hurt me," she said with dawning clarity. "You saved me." Just then, Donovan Price appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Miss Monroe, your transportation is waiting. I suggest you use it, immediately." Celine nodded to Serafina, a silent, shared understanding passing between them. As she walked out, she saw Serafina pull out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen, not with the frantic energy of a jilted bride, but with the cool precision of a woman calling her lawyer. The ride back to Los Angeles was a blur. Celine's phone began to explode with notifications. News travels fast in the digital age, but news from a billionaire's wedding travels at the speed of light. A guest had leaked a video, a shaky, zoomed-in clip of the performance. Of the moment, Blackwood bombshell was already trending. By the time the town car dropped her in front of her humble apartment building, the story was everywhere. Jilted ex-lover sings of secret pregnancy at tech mogul's wedding. The headlines were sensational, trashy, and for once, entirely true. Celine walked into her apartment, the silence a welcome relief after the chaos. She was terrified. She had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the state, but as she placed her hand back on her belly, she felt a profound sense of peace. She hadn't just exposed a lie. She had claimed her truth. She had given her child a story that began not with shame and secrecy, but with a roar. Whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. She was no longer an echo. She was a voice. The weeks that followed the wedding of the year were a maelstrom. Celine's life was turned upside down, but not in the way Alistair had threatened. She became a reluctant media sensation. She was hounded by paparazzi, her photo splashed across tabloids next to unflattering pictures of a furious Alistair and a stoic, elegant Serafina leaving a lawyer's office. Offers for tell-all interviews flooded her inbox, promising staggering sums of money. She ignored them all. She had told her story once, on her own terms. She refused to let it be twisted into a cheap commodity. Instead, she focused inward. She used the second half of the performance fee, which to her surprise was automatically deposited the day after the wedding, a forgotten cog in Alistair's now chaotic machine, to secure a better, safer apartment in a quiet neighborhood. She bought a crib. She started seeing a doctor regularly. She was building a fortress of normalcy for her and her baby against the storm raging outside. The storm, meanwhile, was battering Alistair Blackwood with the full force of a hurricane. The viral video of Celine's performance did more than just humiliate him socially. It eviscerated his professional image. He had built his brand on being a ruthless but visionary leader, a man of unshakable control and foresight. The video painted a different picture, a man who was reckless, cruel, and easily blindsided. It spoke of a catastrophic lack of judgment. The Sterling Blackwood merger, the entire purpose of the sham marriage, was called off in a scathing public statement from Sterling Hotels. citing a fundamental breach of trust. The Blackwood Industries stock price plummeted. The board of directors, already wary of Alistair's arrogant leadership style, was in open revolt. Whispers of invoking the moral turpitude clause in his contract grew into a roar. His empire, built on a foundation of lies, was crumbling. He tried to fight back, of course. A team of high-powered lawyers sent Celine a cease-and-desist letter thick enough to stop a door, threatening lawsuits for defamation, slander, and breach of the NDA. Celine's pro bono lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman connected to her by Serafina's legal team, responded with a simple letter of her own, a formal petition to establish paternity and secure child support. The legal threats from Alistair's camp vanished overnight. The last thing he needed was a DNA test proving Celine's story in a court of law. One cool evening, there was a knock on Celine's new apartment door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, her heart leaped into her throat. It was a woman impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in a severe but elegant chignon. Eleanor Blackwood, Alistair's mother. Celine's hand flew to her stomach protectively. She braced herself for a tirade, for threats, for a checkbook being waved in her face. With a deep breath, she opened the door. "Mrs. Blackwood," Celine said, her voice guarded. Eleanor's eyes, a shade of blue so pale they were almost gray, surveyed Celine from head to toe, her gaze lingering for a moment on Celine's now obvious pregnancy. Her expression was not one of anger, but of weary resignation. "May I come in, Miss Monroe?" she asked, her voice surprisingly soft. Hesitantly, Celine stepped aside. Eleanor walked into the small, clean living room, her eyes taking in the simple furniture, the new crib sitting in the corner. "I am not here to threaten you," Eleanor began, turning to face her. "Nor am I here to defend my son. What he did, to you, to Miss Sterling, to his own legacy, was an act of monstrous arrogance and cowardice." Celine was stunned into silence. "I have watched my son become a man I no longer recognize," Eleanor continued, her voice laced with a deep, ancient sadness. "He is his father's son in all the ways I prayed he wouldn't be. My husband was a brilliant, ruthless man who believed emotion was a liability and people were pawns. He built an empire and died a lonely, bitter man. I see Alistair walking the exact same path." She paused, her gaze softening as it rested again on Celine's belly. "But you did something no one else has ever managed to do. You held a mirror up to him. He may have shattered it in a rage, but he saw his own reflection for a moment. And you have my grandchild." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I will not allow my grandchild to be a secret or a weapon or a bargaining chip. This baby, your baby, is a Blackwood, and it will be treated as such, with or without Alistair's cooperation." She opened her purse and took out not a checkbook, but a simple business card. "This is my personal number. You will want for nothing. Doctors, security, anything you or the baby needs. This is not a bribe to buy your silence, Ms. Monroe. This is a grandmother's promise. My son may have failed his duty. I will not fail mine." A few days after Eleanor's astonishing visit, another unexpected visitor appeared. This time it was Alistair. He looked like a ghost of his former self. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a haggard, broken man. "Celine," he said, his voice hoarse. He was standing in her doorway, looking lost. "What do you want, Alistair?" she asked, not unkindly. There was no triumph in seeing him like this, only a profound sense of tragedy. "They're pushing me out," he mumbled, looking at the floor. "The board. My father's company. It's gone." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "I lost everything." "You had everything that mattered, and you threw it away long before the wedding," she replied softly. He finally seemed to see her, really see her, and the life she was carrying. "Is it a boy or a girl?" "A girl," she said. He nodded slowly. "I can fix this," he said, a flicker of the old Alistair returning. "I still have money. I'll buy you a house, a trust fund for the baby. We can issue a joint statement, say we've reconciled. We can spin this." Celine listened to his frantic plans and she felt a wave of pity for him. Even now, broken and defeated, his only solutions were money and manipulation. He didn't talk about love or regret or being a father. He talked about damage control. When he was finished, she looked at him calmly. I don't want your money, Alistair. I don't want your house. And I don't want a joint statement. Eleanor is already ensuring the baby will be taken care of. Then what? He asked, his voice cracking with desperation. What do you want from me? Celine held his gaze, her voice gentle but unwavering. What I wanted was the man I fell in love with. The one who wrote songs on napkins and dreamed of a life filled with laughter, not assets. But he's gone. So now all I want is for you to be a father to your daughter. But that's something you have to want too. For the right reasons. She took a step back and slowly closed the door, leaving him standing alone in the hallway. It wasn't an act of anger, but of finality. She was closing the door on their past, on the pain and the drama. Her future was inside this apartment, with her. The question of whether he would be a part of it was, for the first time, entirely up to him. 1 year later, the Los Angeles sun streamed through the large window of a bright, airy apartment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The scent in the room was no longer chamomile and old books, but baby powder and the sweet, clean smell of a happy infant. In the center of the living room, on a colorful playmat, Celine Monroe watched her 10-month-old daughter Lily successfully stack one block on top of another. Lily had Alistair's deep blue eyes, but she had Celine's smile. She was a perfect, beautiful fusion of their past, but she represented a future that was entirely new. Celine's life was unrecognizable from the gray, desperate existence of a year ago. The media frenzy had eventually died down, but its embers had provided an unexpected warmth. A small, independent record label, moved by her story and impressed by the raw talent in that viral clip, had approached her. They hadn't offered a pop star contract, but something better, creative freedom. 3 months ago, she had released an EP titled The Premiere. It was a collection of 5 songs, raw and honest, detailing her journey. The lead single, of course, was the song she had sung at the wedding. She had retitled it Lily's Song. It became a quiet anthem of resilience, a favorite on indie radio stations and streaming playlists for those who sought authenticity over gloss. She wasn't a household name, but she was a working musician, earning a living from her art. She was paying her own bills with her own voice. She was free. Her support system was small but strong. Her friend Maya was a constant presence, the proudest of aunties. And then there was the most surprising ally, Eleanor Blackwood. True to her word, Eleanor had become a doting, devoted grandmother. She visited twice a week, leaving her corporate armor at the door. She never spoke of her son unless Celine asked. Instead, she spoke of Lily, of the future. She brought not just expensive gifts, which Celine insisted be put into a trust, but herself. She would sit on the floor, her Chanel suit be damned, and play with Lily, a genuine, unforced joy in her eyes. She was healing her own wounds through her granddaughter. And what of the other players in the drama? Serafina Sterling had risen from the ashes of her humiliation like a phoenix. She had finalized the annulment and, in a landmark civil suit, won a significant settlement from Alistair for fraudulent inducement to marry. But she hadn't just taken the money and disappeared. She had leveraged her story, becoming a powerful and vocal advocate for women in high-stakes business and social circles. She gave talks on the dangers of merger marriages and championed prenuptial agreements that protected women from being treated as commodities. She and Celine never became friends, but they shared a bond of mutual respect. 2 women who had refused to be silent, supporting characters in a powerful man's story. Alistair Blackwood had lost almost everything he valued. Forced out as CEO of the company his father built, he became a pariah in the business world and a punchline in society pages. He was still obscenely wealthy, a man adrift in a sea of his own money. He had tried, in his clumsy way, to connect. He sent extravagant gifts for Lily, which Eleanor dutifully delivered and Celine dutifully placed in the trust fund. He had petitioned for visitation. Celine, after much thought and consultation with Eleanor, had agreed, but with strict conditions. The visits were supervised, held in a neutral location. He was awkward and hesitant around his daughter, a man fluent in the language of boardrooms and balance sheets, utterly inept at baby talk and lullabies. He was trying, but he was still learning to be a person before he could be a father. The door for him was not locked, but it was no longer wide open. He would have to earn his way through, one genuine act at a time. This afternoon, as Lily babbled happily, Celine picked up her guitar. She wasn't practicing for a gig or trying to write a hit. She was just playing for her daughter. She began to softly strum a simple, sweet melody, humming a lullaby. Lily looked up, her blue eyes wide, and she clapped her tiny hands together, a gummy, joyful smile spreading across her face. In that moment, Celine felt a sense of peace so profound, it almost brought her to tears. A year ago, she had stood on a stage, her heart filled with a toxic cocktail of fear, rage, and despair. She had sung a song of betrayal to an audience of strangers. Now she sat on her own floor, in her own home, her heart full of a love so fierce and pure, it was overwhelming. She was singing a song of joy to an audience of one, and it was the greatest performance of her life. She looked out the window not at a gray, rain-slicked street, but at the bright, limitless blue of the California sky. She had faced the monster and won, not by destroying him, but by building a life so beautiful his shadow could no longer reach it. The echo of their past had finally faded, replaced by the sound of Lily's song. In the end, this was never a story about revenge. It was a story of reclamation. Celine Monroe walked into that wedding as a secret, a ghost paid to perform at her own funeral. She walked out as the author of her own truth. She taught us that the most powerful voice you have is your own, and that true wealth isn't measured in stock prices or corporate mergers, but in the quiet, unshakable peace of a life lived with integrity and courage. She didn't just give her daughter a future, she gave her a legacy of strength. If Celine's incredible journey from heartbreak to triumph moved you, and if you believe in the power of speaking your truth, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of real-life drama and the incredible power of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.
From the moment Isabella stepped out of the taxi, her heart thundered in her chest. She was about to beg for a place in a world she once ruled as queen. A lavish mansion belonging to the man who had once sworn undying love. Shadows of betrayal, heartbreak, and shattered vows lurked behind every marble pillar. In the hushed corridors, tragedy whispered her name. Tonight she would humble herself before Richard Harrington, the millionaire husband who had cast her aside. She hoped he would see the woman he once adored. Instead, he slammed the door unknowingly, shattering the life he thought he controlled. Forever changed fate intervened. Isabella Romano was born on a crisp spring morning in the small Italian town of Lucca, raised by parents who prized tradition and family above all else. Her father, Francesco Romano, was a respected chef who owned a modest trattoria on the outskirts of town. Her mother, Caterina, took care of the home and supervised Isabella's studies, instilling in her a deep sense of loyalty and determination. Life in Lucca was simple. Every morning the smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the narrow streets, mixing with the laughter of neighbors, greeting one another in melodic Italian greetings. Despite the warmth of her childhood, Isabella yearned for a life beyond the boundaries of her sleepy town. Even as a teenager, she dreamt of traveling to big cities, Paris, New York, London, and making a name for herself. Her father, while encouraging, warned her about the dangers lurking in unfamiliar worlds. Remember, he would often say, "Never lose your soul chasing what glitters on the outside." But Isabella, with eyes full of hope, believed she could conquer any challenge. By the time she turned 18, Isabella had earned a scholarship to study international business at a renowned university in London. Thrilled to embark on this new journey, She promised her parents she would return home richer in knowledge and experience. She stepped onto the plane, brimming with excitement. Little did she know her life was about to intertwine with that of a man whose wealth and influence stretched far beyond her modest imagination, Richard Harrington. Richard came from a very different world. His parents, George and Clarissa Harrington, were an influential couple from the upper echelons of British society. They owned a string of luxury hotels across Europe, including the Harrington on Park Lane in London, known for its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. From a young age, Richard was groomed to inherit the family empire, private tutors, fencing lessons, summers in Cannes, and winters in St. Moritz. Yet beneath the polished exterior of a trust fund heir was a restless soul. He yearned to make his own mark in business, to build a fortune that didn't merely hinge on his family's legacy. They first met at a university networking event, hosted by the business department. Isabella, nervously holding a cup of punch, saw Richard from across the hall. He wore a tailored navy suit, his sandy brown hair perfectly coiffed, and a confident air that drew people in. But what truly captured Isabella's attention was the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He seemed interested in the world around him, not just the grandeur of his name. When they finally bumped into each other near a table of hors d'oeuvres, something electric passed between them. A single conversation stretched into an hour, then two, until both realized they had found a connection stronger than any first impression should be allowed to have. Richard Harrington had seen many beautiful women in his life, but there was something about Isabella that set her apart. She was neither dazzled by his wealth nor intimidated by his name. Her ambition matched his, and her warmth filled the air whenever she spoke. Their first date was a modest picnic in Hyde Park. Richard brought champagne. Isabella brought homemade sandwiches, reminding him of her father's trattoria back in Lucca. With each passing moment, they peeled back layers of each other's lives. Isabella, the wide-eyed dreamer from a small Italian town. Richard, the legacy-burdened heir, determined to create his own empire. Within 6 months, they were inseparable. Richard invited her to elegant dinners hosted by his parents, introducing her as not only his girlfriend, but also a future partner in his business endeavors. Isabella found herself seated next to bankers, politicians, and celebrities, learning the art of conversation under the sharp eye of Clarissa Harrington. All the while, Richard proved that beneath the luxurious veneer, he craved the simple authenticity Isabella offered. One evening after a gala, they slipped away from the crowd and danced by the Thames under the moonlight. No cameras, no paparazzi, just two people in love, footsteps echoing over the quiet embankment. But social gaps are not bridged overnight. Clarissa Harrington was famously strict with those who entered her son's life. She was cordial to Isabella in public, but her disapproval showed in cold glances and pointed remarks about family standards. Isabella felt the weight of the Harrington name in every micro-interaction. The heartbreak came one Sunday afternoon, when she overheard Clarissa whisper to Richard, "She's lovely, darling, but is she really Harrington material?" Those words sent a chill through Isabella, casting shadows of doubt. Still, Richard stood firmly by her side. His father, George Harrington, proved more diplomatic, urging them to focus on building a future together, if that was truly their dream. Eventually, the budding couple graduated from university. Richard was set to take on a leadership position in the Harrington hotel business, but he also had an idea for a new venture, a chain of luxury eco-resorts across Europe and Asia, championing sustainable tourism. He hoped to run it as a separate entity under the Harrington umbrella, a statement of independence. Isabella, with her international business degree, was determined to help him shape this project. Soon enough, they found themselves working side by side, forging plans late into the night at Richard's penthouse apartment near Knightsbridge. The synergy in business mirrored the passion in their personal life. After 2 years of dating, Richard proposed to Isabella on the rooftop of the Harrington Hotel, with London's skyline shimmering behind them. The ring, an heirloom from his grandmother, sparkled on her finger. She tearfully accepted, and for a while everything felt like a fairy tale. The wedding was a grand spectacle held in Tuscany, close to Isabella's hometown, fulfilling her lifelong dream to celebrate among her childhood friends and relatives. George Harrington spared no expense, and Clarissa begrudgingly oversaw the arrangements to ensure they were Harrington standard. Rows of white chairs lined a vineyard near the town of Lucca, where the sun kissed the rolling hills. Roses, lilies, and hydrangeas decorated the venue in soft pastel colors. Guests flew in from all corners of the globe: London, Paris, New York. Among them were well-known names in the business world, such as the elusive real estate tycoon Michael Anderson and diamond heiress Julia Thompson. Isabella's parents wept tears of joy as she walked down the aisle in a handmade Italian lace gown, her face aglow with love. Richard, clad in a bespoke suit, stood at the altar. The breeze carried the sweet scent of olives and grapes, underscoring the romance of the moment. They exchanged vows that promised loyalty, respect, and unwavering support, a vow that would echo through their marriage for years to come. In that moment, as the priest pronounced them husband and wife, neither imagined the heartbreak lying in wait. The reception was a swirl of laughter and fine dining, an 8-course meal featuring truffle pasta, fresh seafood, and the best vintage wines from local vineyards. There were speeches and toasts, each more moving than the last. Isabella's father, Francesco, wished the couple unending happiness and reminded them of the simplicity of love. Clarissa Harrington delivered a perfectly polite speech, though observers noted the underlying tension in her carefully chosen words. Richard and Isabella danced under the stars, convinced that their union was unshakable. If only the radiance of that day could have shielded them from the trials soon to come. Returning to London, they found themselves thrust into the fast-paced demands of expanding Harrington Resorts. Isabella took the helm as Director of International Development, and Richard championed the Eco-Resorts project. Early on, their synergy translated into significant victories: partnerships with environmentally conscious investors, a footprint in Asia's exotic locations, and glowing press coverage. They became a golden couple in the hospitality industry, attractive, innovative, unstoppable. But success doesn't come without sacrifice. Work hours stretched beyond the typical 9 to 5. Richard jetted between continents to attend meetings, while Isabella coordinated teams from the London headquarters. Late dinners morphed into missed dinners altogether. Their once intimate evenings of discussing dreams over homemade pasta turned into quick text messages that read like corporate updates. The tension, subtle at first, grew thick enough to cause arguments over small things: the color of a new hotel suite's drapes, the direction of a marketing campaign, even which brand of champagne should be stocked at their properties. Amid these professional triumphs and personal strains, Clarissa Harrington took it upon herself to continually remind Isabella of the responsibilities that came with the Harrington name. Sometimes it was a sideways comment about her wardrobe at press events. A Harrington should choose an understated brand, not something so provincial. Other times it was a veiled critique of Isabella's management style. Richard tried to shield Isabella from these remarks, but Clarissa knew how to strike her daughter-in-law's insecurities. This slow trickle of disapproval ate away at Isabella's confidence, making her question whether she truly belonged in the Harrington world. Despite the undercurrents, their business soared. Together they launched 5 eco-resorts within 2 years in Bali, Santorini, the Maldives, Phuket, and the Seychelles. Each property boasted solar energy, sustainable materials, and community-focused development programs. The media heralded them as pioneers of mindful luxury. Investors praised their leadership, culminating in Harrington Resorts, earning record-breaking profits. On the surface, Richard and Isabella seemed unstoppable. Yet behind the scenes, their relationship teetered on a precipice. When everything around them sparkled with success, a hidden darkness emerged. An ambitious junior executive named Stella Carter joined Harrington Resorts, bringing with her impeccable credentials, MBA from Harvard experience at a rival luxury brand, and an uncanny ability to read people. Stella reported directly to Richard, quickly becoming his most trusted advisor. While Isabella initially welcomed Stella's contributions, she grew uncomfortable with how Stella ingratiated herself into every aspect of Richard's professional life. Meetings that once included Isabella were now labeled senior executive briefings, to which Stella held the key invite. Rumors began to swirl within the company corridors. "Stella Carter is gunning for the top," whispered one manager. "She's using Harrington to climb," said another. Isabella tried to dismiss the gossip. She trusted Richard implicitly. He wasn't the type to be swayed by a cunning newcomer. Yet the distance she felt growing between them was more than mere business demands. She sensed an emotional shift, an unspoken tension in his voice whenever she questioned Stella's role or decisions. At home, Richard seemed guarded, often deflecting questions about work. Late-night calls with Stella became frequent. He insisted it was purely professional. "We have a major project launching in Morocco, darling. You know how hectic these things get." And yes, Harrington Resorts was indeed venturing into North Africa, but it was the secrecy that gnawed at Isabella. Why didn't she know more? Why was her role in these expansions suddenly minimized? The breaking point arrived when a photo of Richard and Stella appeared in a society column, snapped at an exclusive gala in Marrakesh. Isabella was in London, finalizing paperwork for a new spa concept. She had no idea Richard even attended that event. When she confronted him about it, he shrugged. It was a last-minute decision, he insisted. We were meeting potential investors, and Stella was the contact. The explanation left a bitter taste in Isabella's mouth. She yearned for the days when they were a team, excitedly discussing every step of their journey. Now she felt relegated to the sidelines of her own life. Months passed, and with them came more success for Harrington. Resorts numbers soared, expansions continued, and the press hailed Richard Harrington as a visionary in the hospitality world. Isabella found herself managing peripheral tasks, increasingly overshadowed by Stella's relentless ambition. Tensions at home escalated. Late-night arguments replaced affectionate conversations. Where there was once mutual adoration, now suspicion and resentment festered. Clarissa, ever the meddling mother-in-law, fueled the discord. She subtly championed Stella, praising her modern perspective and polished manner. During a Harrington family dinner, Clarissa turned to Isabella. "Darling, you must be so relieved Stella is stepping up, helping Richard shoulder such a big empire. You should focus on other aspects of life, like starting a family, perhaps." Isabella felt her cheeks flame with humiliation. The insinuation was clear. She was deemed inadequate in the business realm, relegated to a decorative role at best. Richard, torn between loyalty to his wife and the unstoppable force that was Stella, chose to numb himself in work. He refused to confront the mounting problems. "Can we not argue about this tonight?" He would plead, exhaustion etched on his features. But the more he avoided confrontation, the more Isabella felt isolated, her trust unraveling thread by thread. One evening, the final straw arrived in the form of a board meeting. Isabella discovered she had been quietly sidelined from a massive project in Dubai. The official reason was lack of direct involvement in that region. Furious, she stormed into Richard's office, only to find him in a heated discussion with Stella about rebranding strategies. As soon as she entered, they fell silent. The tension was palpable. The old Isabella might have calmly addressed the issue, but months of pent-up frustration exploded. She accused them both of cutting her out of the very empire she had helped build. Stella responded with an elegant shrug and a condescending smirk that Isabella would never forget. The marriage had been eroding for months, but the day the papers were served still came as a shock. Richard filed for separation, claiming irreconcilable differences and citing that Isabella was hindering the business. He insisted she refused to adapt to the company's evolving needs. Devastated, Isabella locked herself in their Knightsbridge penthouse for days, ignoring calls and the barrage of paparazzi waiting outside. Even her own parents in Lucca could offer little comfort from afar. Richard moved out temporarily, staying at Clarissa's Mayfair home. Publicly, he maintained a stoic silence, releasing only a brief statement from Harrington Resorts that the couple seeks a private resolution. Behind closed doors, he battled guilt and regret. Still, pressure from Clarissa, along with the manipulations of Stella, hardened his resolve. The business had never been more successful, and Stella assured him that Isabella's departure would be best for all parties. Heartbroken, Isabella felt the ground beneath her crumble. She had dedicated her career, her vision, and her heart to this company and this marriage. Overnight, she lost her status, her sense of belonging. Lawyers got involved, dividing assets and drafting settlement options. Isabella refused to sign any final agreement, hoping for reconciliation. She believed this was all a misunderstanding, that the tension from their rapid business growth and Clarissa's constant meddling had poisoned their union. She clung to the hope that the man she married, the one who danced with her by the Thames, would come back to her. A month after the separation, rumors spread that Richard was staying at a new lavish property in the countryside, a mansion in Surrey known as Roseworth Manor. It was a Harrington family retreat, guarded by tall iron gates and a maze of hedgerows. Desperate for a chance to speak to him without lawyers, paparazzi or board members interfering, Isabella mustered the courage to go there unannounced. On a chilly autumn evening, she arrived in a taxi, heart racing. She could feel the weight of every decision and every argument. She hoped the history they shared would be stronger than the rumors swirling about Stella or the pressure from Clarissa. But as she walked up the winding driveway, her once confident stride felt unsteady. When she reached the grand door, Isabella lifted the ornate knocker, her hand trembling. She had prepared a speech, a heartfelt plea for one more chance for an honest conversation. The door opened, revealing Richard. His expression a mixture of shock and guarded resolve. Behind him in the corridor, she caught a glimpse of Stella's silhouette. The sight stabbed her like a dagger. She tried to speak, voice trembling. "Richard, please. I just need to talk. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." He said nothing at first, glancing over his shoulder as though seeking approval from someone else, maybe Stella. Silence strangled the air. Then, in a move that would forever haunt him, Richard stepped back and let the heavy door slam in Isabella's face. The echo reverberated through the manor, sealing her fate on that doorstep. The blow of that door hitting the frame cut through Isabella's final hope. She stood there for a moment, tears carving silent trails down her cheeks. The world seemed to tilt. This was the man she had given her life to, who vowed to love her forever, now shutting her out like an unwelcome stranger. Slowly she turned and walked away from the mansion. Each step felt heavier than the last, her mind spinning with grief and disbelief. Before reaching the taxi, she pulled out her phone. In that fragile moment, she called her mother. "Mama." He shut the door. "He wouldn't even speak to me," she whispered, voice thick with tears. Katerina's sobs on the other end offered limited solace. Isabella sank into the taxi seat, feeling unmoored and utterly alone. The next day, a high-profile gossip column ran a story: Isabella Harrington begs for entry, denied by estranged husband at Roseworth Manor. The story sparked relentless speculation about the marriage. Public opinion swung from pity to scorn. Some labelled Isabella a gold digger, clinging to the Harrington fortune. Others condemned Richard for his coldness, especially when she had helped build the successful eco-resort empire. The swirl of rumours only deepened the gulf between them. In the days that followed, Isabella made a decision that would forever change her life. She left London. Unable to bear the heartbreak and the public scrutiny, she quietly flew back to Lucca. Her parents welcomed her with open arms, but she soon realized that her old bedroom and the comforting aroma of her father's cooking offered only temporary respite. She was no longer the innocent girl who left for university. Life had shaped her into a woman familiar with heartbreak, success, and betrayal. Despite her emotional turmoil, Isabella was not one to wallow indefinitely. She found a small co-working space in nearby Florence, determined to start fresh. Tapping into her international business experience, she began consulting for boutique hospitality brands, family-run villas, eco-friendly farm stays, agriturismos that needed a professional edge to compete. Word of her expertise spread quickly, and soon she had more clients than she could handle on her own. With her father's encouragement, she started her own venture, Romano Consulting. The name honored her family heritage, and she poured herself into each project, ensuring small operators thrived amidst competition from giants like Harrington Resorts. Her heartbreak fueled her, giving her an edge, a passion to prove she wasn't just a discarded pawn of a wealthy empire. As her clients flourished, so did her reputation. Back in London, Richard Harrington was trapped in a gilded cage of his own making. The business soared, yes, but the personal toll mounted. The gossip columns wouldn't let him forget the door slam at Roseworth Manor. Even staff members whispered about the day Isabella showed up. Clarissa, of course, brushed it aside as a necessary step. "We must maintain Harrington prestige." She was causing quite a scene, she sniffed. Stella, on the other hand, leveraged the public drama to further her position. She calmed investors, curated PR campaigns, and became Richard's right-hand executive. But cracks began to appear in the seemingly unstoppable Harrington empire. An influential Middle Eastern partner, Sheikh Omar Al-Fahim, grew skeptical of Stella's aggressive tactics and withdrew from a major Dubai deal. The press started questioning the authenticity of Harrington's sustainable image after an investigative journalist uncovered damaging information about resource mismanagement in their Seychelles resort. Without Isabella's conscientious oversight, corners were cut to maximize profit. And inside the boardroom, tension escalated as old guard executives found Stella's style abrasive, yet Richard seemed too distracted to intervene. Meanwhile, Richard was haunted by guilt. He replayed the moment he slammed the door on Isabella, hearing it in his mind late at night. The memory of her tearful eyes broke him in ways he wouldn't admit to anyone. Yet he couldn't reconcile the swirling confusion inside him. Anger, regret, and the weight of a mother who insisted he move on from a failed marriage. Fate is sometimes mercifully cruel. A year after the Roseworth Manor incident, Isabella was invited to speak at a hospitality conference in Rome. Her consulting firm's success caught the attention of European travel boards. Despite her reservations, she accepted the keynote invitation. She had come a long way since heartbreak. Standing on stage before hoteliers and industry leaders, she spoke passionately about the power of sustainable luxury, rooted in genuine community engagement. When she finished, the applause roared through the auditorium, validating all her struggles. Among the crowd sat Michael Anderson, the real estate tycoon, who once attended her wedding. After the speech, he approached her. "That was phenomenal, Isabella," he said, extending his hand. "I'm impressed by how far you've come. I have a few projects that might interest you." The two arranged a meeting for the following day to discuss potential collaborations in Spain and South America. But another far more painful presence lingered at the conference: Richard Harrington. Though not scheduled to speak, he was there with Stella to meet potential investors. The sight of Isabella on stage, radiant and commanding, left him frozen. She was no longer the tearful woman at his doorstep. She had transformed into a confident leader respected by the industry. Richard felt a jolt of admiration and longing overshadowed by shame. During a coffee break, they inevitably crossed paths. Isabella instinctively turned to avoid him, but he reached out. "Isabella." His voice faltered. She paused, steeling herself. Turning around, she met his eyes, arms folded protectively. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of unspoken apologies hanging in the air. Finally, Richard mustered a greeting. "Your keynote was impressive," he said, softly. Isabella thanked him politely, her eyes guarded. Stella soon materialized at his side, placing a territorial hand on his arm. Isabella nodded tersely and walked away, leaving Richard to wrestle with the emptiness she left behind. While Isabella rose in esteem, Harrington Resorts began to buckle under Stella Carter's leadership. Internal reports revealed overextension in multiple markets. Resources were stretched too thin. Environmental groups threatened legal action over broken sustainability promises. To quell the uproar, large sums of money were funneled into hasty repairs and hush settlements. Board members muttered that Richard Harrington had lost his edge. The once stable empire started to crack, and Stella's iron-fisted approach stifled creativity and morale. Sensing the board's discontent, Stella manipulated Richard further, insisting that more expansions were the only way to keep the brand's image fresh. In truth, these expansions masked the cash flow problems. Investors grew nervous, and Clarissa herself scolded Stella privately, though she feared publicly undermining the woman who now controlled her son's ear. The tension reached a boiling point when Harrington Resorts faced a lawsuit over environmental violations in Phuket, a direct contradiction to the brand's eco-friendly claims. The media had a field day, dubbing the scandal greenwashing at Harrington Resorts. Stocks plummeted, wiping out millions overnight. Richard's anxiety soared, fueled by insomnia, and a nagging guilt about driving away the one person who could have prevented this fiasco. He was beginning to realize that in slamming the door on Isabella, he had lost not just his wife, but also a moral compass and a business partner who genuinely cared about sustainable practices. Late one night, Richard found himself alone in his penthouse, swirling a tumbler of whiskey. The city lights spread out below like a neon ocean, mocking his emptiness. He rummaged through old photos stored on his laptop, pictures of him and Isabella, beaming at their wedding, walking the vineyards in Tuscany, standing in front of the Bali Eco Resort's construction site. Each image cut deeper, reminding him of the vows he'd broken and the legacy he'd tainted. Over the next few days, Richard took tentative steps to rectify his mistakes. He began attending environmental conferences, meeting with sustainability experts to understand where Harrington Resorts had gone wrong. He distanced himself from Stella, ignoring her calls for aggressive expansions. Board members noticed the shift, and Clarissa fumed that her son was becoming too sentimental. But Richard pressed on, driven by an internal realization that without a moral center, no empire could stand indefinitely. When the environmental lawsuit threatened to shut down Phuket operations, Richard reached out to the same consultant group that had once mocked Harrington's greenwashing Waverley & Jones, a firm recommended by an old friend. In the midst of negotiations, he learned a surprising detail. The lead negotiator at Waverley & Jones was one of Isabella's close associates. This consultant mentioned that Isabella had helped shape a fair trade agreement for a group of small hoteliers in Southeast Asia, a benchmark for genuine, sustainable tourism. The news hit him like a thunderbolt. Isabella was still quietly working in the exact sphere that Harrington claimed to champion. Stella Carter, threatened by Richard's shift in direction, struck before he could fully unseat her. Behind the scenes, she formed an alliance with a rival hotel group, planning to leak confidential Harrington documents that would further damage the company's reputation. Her aim was twofold: sabotage Richard for hesitating to expand and secure her own position by jumping ship to a competitor. It was a cunning move that blindsided the Harrington board. When the leaked documents surfaced in the press, showing questionable financial maneuvers and environmental disregard, Harrington Resorts suffered a massive blow to its credibility. Major investors pulled out. Stocks tanked further. In the chaos, the board demanded decisive action. They convened an emergency meeting in London. Stella, smelling blood, insisted on Richard's resignation. Clarissa begged her son to fight, but he was exhausted. Remorse weighed him down, and the relentless scandal seemed impossible to fix alone. The board was split. Some blamed Stella, some blamed Richard, and some even invoked the memory of Isabella, lamenting the days when Harrington truly cared about sustainable innovation. In a bold move, Richard took control of the meeting. He exposed Stella's alliance with the rival hotel group, presenting email evidence of her duplicity. A hush fell over the boardroom. Realizing the jig was up, Stella tried to accuse Richard of forging the evidence, but even Clarissa stepped in to confirm suspicious behavior. Security escorted Stella from the building. The immediate danger was removed, but the damage to Harrington Resorts was staggering. The empire was on the brink of collapse, and Richard stood in the center of the wreckage, uncertain how to salvage what remained. Word of the Harrington collapse reached Isabella through international business headlines. She felt a pang of sorrow, not triumph. Despite everything, she had once poured her soul into that company. Memories of brainstorming sessions with Richard in their small London apartment flickered in her mind. She saw images of the newly opened Bali resort, remembered the faces of the local staff they had empowered with fair wages and skills training. But the empire she once helped build was being dismantled by greed and poor decisions. While she had no intention of returning to the Harrington fold, her compassion won out. Through a mutual connection, Matthew Ford, a well-regarded hospitality consultant, she reached out to Richard indirectly. Matthew was astonished when Isabella said, "If Richard truly wants to save what's left, and if he has genuine intentions, now I'm willing to provide guidance. But this is strictly professional." When the message reached Richard, he felt a mixture of relief and shame. Could he really face her after everything he'd done, after slamming that door in her face? And yet this might be the only lifeline to resurrect Harrington Resorts. With trembling resolve, he sent her an email, a formal invitation to meet at the Harrington London office to discuss a potential partnership. Isabella hesitated before responding. She knew this could be a trap for more heartbreak. But her sense of duty, both to the cause of sustainable hospitality and to the memories she cherished, guided her decision. She agreed to meet, but only under strict professional terms, no personal entanglements, no manipulations, just a chance to do some good. The day of the meeting felt surreal. Isabella stepped into the Harrington headquarters for the first time since her separation. The receptionist who once greeted her daily with a bright "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington," now gave a polite, uncertain nod. She walked down corridors lined with framed articles praising Richard's success from years past, articles she had once proudly edited. In the conference room, she found Richard waiting alone. He looked older, more tired, the weight of his actions etched into the lines around his eyes. She approached, chin raised. "Richard," she said, her voice cool. He stood up, cleared his throat, and motioned for her to sit. Silence enveloped them, like a thick fog. "Thank you for coming," he managed. "I know I have no right to ask for your help after everything." His voice trailed off. Isabella laid a binder on the table. "Let's keep this professional. You want to salvage the company's sustainability reputation. I have a plan." For the next hour, they discussed the strategy. Isabella presented a comprehensive roadmap, cutting down expansions, refocusing on genuinely eco-friendly policies, re-engaging local communities, and forging transparent partnerships. Richard listened intently, occasionally offering input. She was the same woman he once worked with late into the night, mapping out eco-resorts that would revolutionize the industry. The difference was that now her eyes held a guarded distance, a barrier he recognized as the scar of his betrayal. The board, skeptical of Isabella's return, grilled her in a subsequent meeting. Some believed she was there to humiliate the Harrington name. Others worried about the cost of the radical overhaul she proposed. But Isabella's clear-eyed explanations and unwavering confidence began to sway them. She demonstrated that the current path, steeped in scandal and environmental neglect, was far more expensive in the long run. She brought up concrete examples referencing her successful work with boutique hotels in Asia and Europe. Slowly, opinions shifted. Clarissa Harrington was conspicuously absent from these sessions. Rumor had it she was sulking at Roseworth Manor, too ashamed to face the mess that had unraveled under her watch. As for Richard, he gave Isabella the reins to craft a new sustainability division. The plan was to rebrand Harrington Resorts from the ground up, publicly acknowledge the mistakes, and pledge accountability. They would back up their pledge with verifiable audits from external agencies, something never done before at Harrington. Working together again brought a strange mix of nostalgia and pain. Late nights at the office, reviewing spreadsheets, conferring with lawyers, and drafting press releases felt like stepping back into a rhythm they once shared. But gone were the soft touches and playful banter. Instead, they communicated through spreadsheets and bullet points. Richard sensed her distance, respecting the boundaries she set. Yet every time she said his name, a flicker of hope ignited in him. Hope for forgiveness, or at least understanding. In the midst of restructuring, a new scandal threatened to erupt. A tabloid found out about the behind-closed-doors collaboration between Richard and Isabella. They published a headline dripping with drama: "Harrington's ex-wife to the rescue," or "A vengeful plot." Reporters swarmed the Harrington building, shouting questions about the status of their marriage and the sincerity of their reconciliation. Isabella, who had carefully avoided personal discussions, found herself cornered by cameras one evening. She refused to feed the gossip, stating only, "My work here is to help restore a sustainable vision for Harrington Resorts. That's all." The unspoken words lingered. The rest is nobody's business. Behind the scenes, Clarissa made an unexpected move. She reached out to Isabella, requesting a private meeting at Roseworth Manor. Torn between anger and curiosity, Isabella agreed, if only to ensure no interference would jeopardize the company's fragile turnaround. The mansion was just as imposing as she remembered. Walking up to its ornate door reminded her of the night she begged for entry and received only heartbreak. Clarissa greeted her in a drawing room filled with antiques and family portraits. She appeared subdued shadows of guilt etched across her refined features. "Isabella," she began, voice trembling slightly. "I've made many mistakes. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I need you to know everything I did was to protect Richard and the Harrington name." Isabella listened quietly. She recalled Clarissa's relentless criticisms, the microaggressions the day she overheard that Isabella might not be Harrington material. The older woman continued. "Stella came at a vulnerable time. I thought she could help Richard keep the company on top. I turned a blind eye to her methods. I was wrong." A moment passed in thick silence. Isabella sighed. "What you did caused immense pain. I can't rewrite the past. But I'm here for the company's sake, and for the values it can still uphold." Clarissa nodded, tears glistening. "I understand. That's more than I deserve." As the rebrand progressed, Harrington Resorts signed new agreements with international conservation groups, launched an internal ethics committee, and sponsored community-driven projects in areas where they operated. Isabella's blueprint began to bear fruit. Travel journalists started penning cautious praise for Harrington's attempt at redemption. Investor confidence stabilized. Stocks, while far from their peak, stopped plummeting. Step by step, they clawed back from the brink of disaster. Richard found himself in awe of Isabella anew, her relentless dedication, her ability to win over skeptics, and her unstoppable spirit. The nights they spent in conference rooms gradually warmed not into the romantic haze they once shared, but into a mutual respect. Each small success fueled his resolve to set things right. He penned a handwritten letter, an apology he'd rehearsed in his head 1,000 times. One evening, as she prepared to leave the office, he handed her an envelope. Isabella hesitated, seeing his scrawled signature. "Richard, I don't think. Please read it." "When you have a moment," he said softly. She tucked it into her bag, uncertainty clouding her features. Back in her rented London flat, she refused to stay in any Harrington property. Isabella poured herself a glass of wine. She stared at the envelope, heart pounding. Finally, she tore it open. Inside was a multi-page letter. Richard's handwriting shaking in places. "Isabella, I don't know how to begin apologizing for what I did. Slamming the door on you was the worst mistake of my life. Not because of the business fallout, but because I broke the vows we made under a Tuscan sun. The shame I feel is indescribable. I should have fought for you, for us. Instead, I let pride, fear, and outside pressures poison my judgment. Seeing you now leading with grace and conviction reminds me of the woman I fell in love with, who captured my heart at that university networking event. Every day, I'm haunted by my actions, yet I'm also grateful for the second chance you've given Harrington Resorts. I don't deserve it. I can only hope that one day I'll earn your trust again, if not as a husband, then at least as someone who will spend the rest of his life making amends. I will respect any boundaries you set, but I want you to know I still love you. Forgive me if that's too selfish to admit. Richard. Tears blurred her vision. She recalled the boyish grin he wore when he first offered her a homemade sandwich in Hyde Park, how safe she felt in his arms dancing by the Thames. But her heartbreak was still raw. She spent the rest of the night wide awake, torn between memories of what they once had and the irrevocable pain he caused. As weeks turned into months, Harrington Resorts slowly regained footing thanks to Isabella's strategy. Magazines ran stories about the brand's remarkable about-face. Investors, initially cautious, began trickling back. Isabella and Richard worked side by side, forging a reluctant camaraderie. They still avoided personal topics in front of others, maintaining professional decorum. Yet after hours, they'd have moments of quiet reflection, discussing ethical business practices and how to safeguard them against future corruption. One evening, after finalizing a significant contract with the World Wildlife Federation, they stepped onto the balcony overlooking the Thames. Lights twinkled along the river's edge. A nostalgic hush fell between them. "I never thought we'd be here again," Richard murmured, hands resting on the railing. "Neither did I," Isabella replied, sipping her tea. She glanced at him. The yearning in his eyes was unmistakable, but so was her caution. He tentatively reached for her hand, stopping short. She didn't move away. "Isabella," he whispered, voice trembling, "I know I can't undo the past, but would you let me try to build a future where we can at least be friends? Maybe more." Her heart pounded. The rational part of her mind warned of betrayal of the door slam in Surrey. But another part remembered the vow she made when she first fell in love to never let fear overshadow the possibility of happiness. She slid her hand into his, giving it a gentle squeeze. "One step at a time, Richard. To finalize a new initiative connecting Harrington Resorts with local European vineyards, Isabella proposed visiting Lucca to scout potential partnerships. It had been over 2 years since she set foot in her childhood home. Richard volunteered to accompany her under the guise of business necessity. Hesitantly, she agreed. Part of her wanted him to see where she came from again, perhaps to remind them both of who they used to be. They arrived in Lucca by train, the rolling Tuscan hills as breathtaking as ever. Isabella's parents, Francesco and Caterina, welcomed them. It was an awkward reunion, overshadowed by the heartbreak that had once devastated their daughter. But as the days passed, Richard's earnest remorse shone through. He helped Francesco in the trattoria kitchen, learned traditional recipes, and listened intently as Caterina recounted Isabella's difficult homecoming after the door slam. While forging connections with local vineyard owners, Isabella witnessed a gentler, more introspective Richard. He wasn't the cocky magnate who used to stride through boardrooms. He joked with farmers about grape harvests, expressed genuine interest in sustainable farming methods, and even got his hands dirty in the vineyard. In a quiet moment under the Tuscan sun, picking a ripe fig, Isabella realized her resentment was melting, replaced by a cautious sense of rekindled affection. Each day in Lucca brought Isabella and Richard closer. Yet an unspoken question loomed. Could she ever fully forgive him? They ventured to the vineyard where they'd once danced after a friend's wedding. The memory of that night, brimming with young love and possibility, made her chest ache. As the sun set behind cypress trees, Richard admitted he'd been dreaming of this moment, just to be near her, without the weight of scandal or resentment crushing them. "I'm not the man I was," he said quietly, "and I promise never to be him again." She wanted to believe him, seeing how his eyes shone with sincerity. That night they shared dinner with her parents, the conversation laced with laughter and cautious hope. Caterina pulled Isabella aside, whispering, "Do what makes your heart proud, cara mia. If that means giving him a chance, do it with your whole heart." On their final night in Lucca, a phone call from Clarissa Harrington surprised Isabella. The older woman asked if they could speak privately. Isabella agreed, half dreading another confrontation. Clarissa's voice, however, trembled with vulnerability. She apologized for her role in the breakdown of the marriage, admitting she had been blinded by her obsession with preserving the Harrington legacy. "Richard told me about your time here," Clarissa said softly. "He's never sounded so peaceful. I see now how much you brought to his life and to our family business. Thank you for giving Harrington Resorts a second chance, even if you never give me one." Isabella felt a complex swirl of emotions: anger, pity, empathy. There were no instant cures for wounds inflicted by Clarissa's past behavior, yet the apology felt genuine. "I appreciate your words," Isabella responded carefully. "Perhaps we can let our actions speak going forward." Returning to London, they officially launched Harrington's rebranded eco-luxury program. Reporters who once clamored for gossip now ran features highlighting genuine community partnerships, improved working conditions, and transparent supply chains. Public trust started to mend. Even the board members who once doubted Isabella recognized her as the key to their salvation. During a celebratory press conference, Richard publicly acknowledged her contributions. None of this would be possible without Isabella Romano, whose vision and commitment guided us back to our core values. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment Richard turned to Isabella, with gratitude shining in his eyes. She offered a gracious smile the first time in years she felt at peace standing by his side. After the conference, they found themselves alone in his office. Isabella fidgeted with her notes, uncertain what to say. Richard hesitated, then spoke. If you'd like, we could have dinner tonight. Just us. No business talk, no cameras." He paused, searching her expression. "I want to make new memories with you." She took a breath, heart fluttering. "All right. One dinner." They chose a quiet Italian restaurant near the Thames, reminiscent of the small family-owned places Isabella adored. Over candlelight, they spoke about everything except the company childhood anecdotes, travel stories, and personal revelations. Richard listened intently to her experiences in Florence and Rome, how she built Romano Consulting from scratch, the obstacles she overcame. Isabella, in turn, heard about his struggles, crippling self-doubt, the pain of realizing he'd lost the woman he loved, and the slow awakening to his own accountability. A soft violin played in the background, and as dessert arrived, Richard reached for her hand. "I'm sorry," he repeated, voice low with emotion. "Not just for slamming that door, but for every time I let you feel unworthy." Isabella's eyes glistened. "We can't change the past, Richard, but if we move forward, we do it with honesty. And I won't settle for anything less." He nodded, tears threatening to spill. The moment felt like a fragile crystal. One wrong word could shatter it. Yet by the time they left the restaurant, hand in hand, an unspoken possibility of renewed love glowed between them. With reconciliation on the horizon, new challenges emerged. The media speculated wildly about a rekindled romance, fueling paparazzi outside their homes. Shareholders, unsettled by the personal drama, questioned whether a potential remarriage would disrupt business. Even Clarissa's stance wavered. She wanted them back together for the right optics, but also worried Isabella would overshadow her influence. Richard and Isabella navigated these hurdles cautiously. They attended couples therapy under the radar, determined not to repeat old mistakes. They built trust slowly, step by step. Arguments still flared over residual suspicions, over the painful memory of Stella's role, over Clarissa's continued meddling. But each time they resolved to communicate openly, refusing to let resentment fester. In a poignant gesture, Isabella took him to the spot by the Thames where they once danced. They stood at the edge of the water, recalling a simpler time. He held her close, gently rocking to the ambient hum of city life. Tears stained both their cheeks, a release of pent-up sorrow and renewed hope. "I don't want to hurt you ever again," Richard whispered. Months passed, and together they steered Harrington Resorts into a new era of success. An empire built not merely on luxurious facades, but on tangible community uplift and environmental stewardship. Isabella's name appeared alongside Richard's in major travel publications, praising them for resurrecting a fallen giant with integrity. Romano Consulting merged in part with Harrington's sustainability division, creating a joint venture that placed Isabella in a powerful yet respected leadership position. On a balmy evening in the living room of Isabella's London flat, Richard got down on one knee. "I gave away our future," once he said, voice trembling with emotion. "Now I ask if you'll let me build a new one with you. Marry me again." Tears filled Isabella's eyes. She recalled the day he slammed the door in her face at Roseworth Manor. But now he was on his knees, vulnerable, remorseful, and ready to change. She smiled through her tears, nodding. "Yes, Richard. Let's try again. But this time, we do it as equals." Their second wedding was a quiet affair, held in a sunlit garden outside London. No massive guest list, no paparazzi, just close friends and family, including Francesco and Caterina from Lucca, and even Clarissa, who maintained a respectful demeanor. Vines twined around a wooden arch, soft music played, and a light breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine. As they exchanged vows again, both Isabella and Richard felt the weight of all they had endured. Promises, broken hearts shattered, and an empire nearly lost. Yet here they were forging a union stronger than the first, built on hard-earned lessons. When they kissed to seal their vows, the guests erupted in applause. It wasn't just the applause of a society spectacle. It was a joyful outpouring of support for two souls who found the courage to try again. In the following years, Harrington Resorts flourished as a global leader in authentic eco-luxury. Isabella and Richard continued to champion local communities, forging alliances with non-profits and activists. The media hailed their turnaround story as a beacon of hope that even the mightiest can fall, but with the right guidance and humility, they can rise again. Gone were the days of slamming doors in heartbreak. In their place, doors opened wide, welcoming collaboration, compassion, and love. And so with the final threads of heartbreak, woven into the fabric of redemption, Isabella and Richard's story stood as a testament to the fact that sometimes losing everything is precisely what leads to finding what truly matters. Love and betrayal, fortune and loss. Isabella and Richard's story proves that even the greatest empires can crumble with one wrong turn, and yet miracles happen when two people dare to rebuild. They faced trials that threatened their marriage, their business, and their very identities. And still they emerged stronger, finding that real wealth isn't measured in money or fame, but in trust, respect, and courage. If their journey captivated your heart, don't let the story end here. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more tales of love, redemption, and the raw power of the human spirit. Who knows, maybe the next story you hear will inspire you to take your own leap of faith. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for our next dramatic chapter in life's unpredictable saga.